This morning I'd like to read portions of Dr. King's Christmas sermon on peace, which was delivered in 1967. I think you'll be surprised at how relevant they are today. This Christmas season finds us a rather bewildered human race. We have neither peace within nor peace without. Our world is sick with war. Everywhere we turn, we see its ominous possibilities. If we don't have goodwill toward men in this world, we will destroy ourselves by the misuse of our own instruments and our own power. Wisdom born of experience should tell us that war is obsolete. There may have been a time when war served as a negative good by preventing the spread and growth of an evil force. But the very destructive power of modern weapons of warfare eliminates even the possibility that war may any longer serve as a negative good. As we explore these conditions, I would like to suggest that modern man really go all out to study the meaning of nonviolence, its philosophy, and its strategy. We have experimented with the meaning of nonviolence in our struggle for racial justice in the United States, but now the time has come for man to experiment with nonviolence in all areas of human conflict, and that means nonviolence on an international scale. Now let me suggest first that if we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And as long as we try, the more we are going to have war in this world. Now the judgment of God is upon us, and we must either learn to live together as brothers, or we're all going to perish together as fools. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. Did you ever stop to think that you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world? You get up in the morning and you go to the bathroom and reach over for the sponge, and that's handed to you by a Pacific Islander. You reach for a bar of soap, and that's given to you by the hands of a Frenchman. And then you go into the kitchen to drink your coffee for the morning, and that's poured into your cup by a South American. Or maybe you want tea. That's poured into your cup by a Chinese. Or maybe you're desirous of having cocoa for breakfast, and that's poured into your cup by a West African. And then you reach over for your toast, and that's given to you at the hands of an English-speaking farmer, not to mention the baker. And before you finish eating breakfast in the morning, you've depended on more than half the world. This is the way our universe is structured. This is its interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. Now let me say secondly, that if we are to have peace in the world, men and nations must embrace the nonviolent affirmation that ends and means must cohere. One of the great philosophical debates of history has been over the whole question of means and ends. And there have always been those who argued that the end justifies the means, that the means really aren't important. The important thing is to get to the end, you see. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. All this is saying is that in the final analysis, means and ends must cohere because the end is pre-existent in the means. And ultimately, destructive means cannot bring about constructive ends. Now let me say that the next thing we must be concerned about if we are to have peace on earth and goodwill toward men is the nonviolent affirmation of the sacredness of all human life. Every man is somebody because he is a child of God. And so when we say, "Thou shalt not kill," we're really saying that human life is too sacred to be taken on the battlefields of the world. Man is more than a tiny vagary of whirling electrons or a wisp of smoke from a limitless smoldering. Man is a child of God made in his image, and therefore must be respected as such. Until men see this everywhere, until nations see this everywhere, we will be fighting wars. One day we've got to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. But in Christ there is no Jew nor Gentile. In Christ there is neither male nor female. In Christ there is neither communist nor capitalist. In Christ, somehow, there is neither bound nor free. We are all one in Christ Jesus, and when we truly believe in the sacredness of human personality, we won't exploit people, we won't trample over people with the iron feet of oppression, we won't kill anybody.
Reviewing this sermon was difficult because my emotions took me back to painful memories of Dr. King's assassination, and by extension, my participation in demonstrations as a student at the University of Missouri. I decided to not focus on the fear and anger, but instead I focused on the fact that Dr. King was a global leader who saw the intrinsic humanity of everyone. Dr. King delivered many significant speeches, but this particular speech continued the controversy of King's focus on anti-war and international issues. Many people questioned this new direction, including his knowledge and right to discuss international affairs. I remember being upset with Dr. King when he appeared to focus more on an anti-war message, as I feared this would dilute the civil rights message and stall the movement. The late 60s was a time of dualities. On the one hand, millions of African Americans were unable to vote. Certain professions and union membership were off limits. Access to quality education, housing, and health care was limited. And access to public accommodations such as restrooms, recreation facilities, hotels, and beaches were not open to African Americans. On the other hand, life went on and was good for other Americans. A large number of Americans entered the middle class via the GI Bill. Factories and plants were thriving. Bank loans were available for suburban housing. Union jobs and advancement opportunities were widespread. Dr. King frequently spoke about the immorality of denying rights to some citizens while claiming a moral high ground in our diplomatic dealings with other countries. He was working to bring the country out of the swamp of oppression. I recall the open anger of many Southerners towards African Americans and the smugness of some Northerners who were in denial about their complicity in the overt and covert violence. Today, I take heart from the fact the nonviolent movements and leaders have emerged across the world. King was a special man who rose to a special time in our history. His 1967 message is more relevant today than ever, as we hear the pain of people who believe they have been left behind, and the pain of people who have been historically marginalized because of their race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, or economic status. The rise of movements such as #MeToo and the positive activism of new groups focused on making the country a more livable and accepting place convinces me that there is a straight line from Dr. King's message of peace to today's activism. As King said, we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. As Christians, we have a moral responsibility to strive to be our best selves and to be more inclusive and welcoming to all God's children. In conclusion, these are my 1967 and 2018 reflections on Dr. King's timeless Christmas Eve message. So I say, God bless the members of First Congregational United Church of Christ as we strive to provide an extravagant welcome to all in our everyday lives.
The second reading this morning is from the words of Reverend Polly Murray. Polly Murray was an exceptional woman born in 1910, an educator, attorney, activist, who was then ordained an Episcopal priest at the age of 67. Reverend Murray's sermon, The Dilemma of the Minority Christian, is excerpted from the book Daughters of Thunder by Betty Collier Thomas, which contains the biographies and sermons of Black women preachers from 1850 to 1979. Facing both racial and gender discrimination, Murray became active in nonviolent civil rights in the 1940s. She used her extraordinary legal talent to battle discrimination. For example, she wrote the amendment that included women in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination. She also authored the brief White versus Cook, which dismantled state laws preventing women from serving on juries. A woman of many firsts, Murray was the only African-American female lawyer hired during the late 1950s by the prestigious law firm, New York law firm of Paul Weiss Rifkin, Wharton and Garrison. And she was the first Black woman and only the second African-American to be ordained a priest in the Protestant Episcopal Church. Polly Murray also co-founded the National Organization for Women. And now I read her words. To be a Christian, to follow Jesus Christ, means to be self-giving, pouring out love upon others, even when they are unlovely and unlovable. And this is the hardest part of our faith. We were not made to live alone. We were made to live in community. But it is in community that we come into conflict with others. It's easy to respond to love to those who love and cherish us. It is much harder to see Jesus Christ in those who dislike us, who may hate or despise us or try to hurt us. Yet the hard truth is that this is the only way. For when we respond with resentment and retaliation, the greatest damage is not what we do to others, but what we do to ourselves. By cutting ourselves off from God's love, by alienating ourselves from a sense of community, and winding up feeling lost and alone. For those of us who have been born into a group which has been the object of contempt, injustice, and oppression, the figure of the suffering servant, the example of Jesus Christ, presents us with a most difficult dilemma. On the one hand, we strive for self-respect and pride in ourselves and our achievements against those who would deny our humanity and our personhood. On the other hand, we are told that self-pride is a stumbling block to salvation. Are we expected to endure injustice submissively, to give our backs to the smiters, not to be rebellious when all around us we see evil and injustice? I would be dishonest if I told you that I have answers to these questions. I wrestle with them daily, for in them lies the ultimate test of our faith in God, a faith that God is in control of the universe and of our own destiny, that God is continually working to reconcile humankind to himself and his love, that whatever we suffer is a part of God's ultimate plan, that we are, in fact, God's suffering servants in the salvation history of the world. Somehow, I feel that we have a destiny which is beyond our struggle for civil rights and human rights, or social justice, and that our consciousness of this destiny must permeate all that we do, here and now, in this time, in this place, in this country. In the words of that great prophet, the late Dr. Martin Luther King, who, faced with the massive violence of the segregation system, told his followers, "Our most fruitful course is to stand firm, move forward nonviolently, accept disappointments, and cling to hope. Our determined refusal not to be stopped will eventually open the door to fulfillment. By recognizing the necessity of suffering as a righteous cause, we may achieve our humanity's stature. To guard ourselves from bitterness, we need the vision to see in this generation's ordeals the opportunity to transfigure both ourselves and American society." Critics of Dr. King charged him with not dealing squarely with the issue of immoral power in collision with powerless morality. But in retrospect, it becomes crystal clear to us that Jesus Christ uttered an incontestable truth when he said, "Those who take to the sword shall be slain by the sword." And one wonders if Dr. King did not glimpse the true problem when he said, "The struggle is not between black and white. It is between good and evil."
When my children were little, they often heard Kermit the Frog from Sesame Street sing, "It's not easy being green." The passage just read reminded me that it's not easy being black in America. After many decades, I've had experiences where I've had to use my Christian faith, the teachings of Dr. King, the strength of Malcolm X, and the words of my mother, who told me on my 21st birthday, "You go out and register and vote because that's how we're going to make a difference." Those words have never left me. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in Middle America, a segregated city on the banks of the Mississippi River. It's often referred to as the gateway to the West, but it was definitely a southern city. Things were different for folks who looked like me. Oh, it wasn't like Birmingham, Alabama, where 4 little black girls while in Sunday school were killed by a bomb set by the Ku Klux Klan. Or in Mississippi, where 14-year-old Emmett Till was brutally killed for supposedly whistling at a white woman. In our town, there were no white or colored signs on water fountains. The racism was subtle. We could ride the buses and sit anywhere on the buses. but we couldn't drive the buses. We could buy things in the downtown department stores or put money in the bank, but we couldn't work as salespersons or bank clerks, only janitors or elevator operators. Movie theaters, hotels, and restaurants did not permit us to enter. Only on my wedding day was I able to eat in a downtown restaurant or register in a St. Louis hotel, and that was 56 years ago. I went to segregated schools, got a good education, but the textbooks I had often had the names of white children who used them before they were sent to our schools. I lived in a closed community. It was not easy for my family and others living there, but the teachers, the ministers, the NAACP leaders, the Urban League organizers, and especially the teachings of Jesus Christ taught me not to hate or retaliate, but become a soldier for peace and love and work toward equality for all. Now today, 2018, the challenge continues in our world. And just as you heard Dr. King so eloquently say, the challenge continues the struggle is not between black and white, but it's between good and evil. And that is relevant today more so than ever before.